I'm Victor. I'm the product manager for analytics at edX. So I'm responsible for determining what we build in terms of analytics tools for course teams, professors, internal, etc. That also means that I don't actually do any of the work. Sorry, Google Drive seems to be unhappy today and is ignoring my button presses, or at least taking a very long time to think about them. No. Wow, okay. Anyway, we'll fight with the slides as necessary. Right, so I just want to give a shout out to the analytics team at edX who actually does all the work, and so everything I'm going to be showing, they built, I didn't. Most of them are here. Gabe, Brian, Dennis, Dan, Hassan is at Urbasoft in Pakistan, and Olga is here too, I think. And then some other folks have been on the team before and moved on to other things. All their work. Right, so learning objectives for today, which is to say what we're talking about. I want to talk about a little bit what do we do as an analytics team. I think some people here know quite a lot, other people might not be familiar. I want to talk about what we're planning and describe kind of what's going to be coming from edX analytics over the next little while. And I want to talk about how we can all work together and sort of you can get involved with OpenEdX. Throughout, I'll try to point out things that you might need to know if you're using OpenEdX, if you want to contribute, or if you really want to get involved with the analytics specifically. Okay, seems to be working better now. Right, so what do we do? At a high level, right, the reason we have an analytics team is about this feedback loop. In all sorts of situations, we do different things. We want to measure how well they worked. We want to learn from what we measured. And decide whether to do something differently or the same next time, right? And so this applies to course teams designing courses, this applies to edX building features, this applies to you deciding kind of what you do with your OpenEdX install, etc. And so the analytics team, when the browser will decide to switch slides, lives kind of down in the bottom right corner here, where we make sure that we can actually measure. Come on, computer. There. Make sure we can measure what's going on, and we try to actually support the learning, right? So we provide ways to visualize the data or understand, answer questions to make decisions about what to do next time. And like I said, really there's a lot of different customers and users of this data that have the same feedback cycle. Fine. You get sneak previews every couple of slides. Sorry. Right, so course teams want to know how to make the courses better and what's happening. Researchers want data so they can sort of do more fundamental analysis of what isn't effective about courses and how to teach. Students want to know what they should do next and how they're doing. Institutions want to understand whether their sort of online learning strategy is working. edX wants to know if our business is working and how our platform is working. And then the OpenEdX community wants to use some of these tools and basically has all these same problems in your own installations and settings, right? So I'm going to talk a little bit about most of these. Analytics-wise, we don't really have anything directly student-facing today, so I'm not going to talk about that. Right, so course teams. At a high level, we think of course teams as having kind of these main three questions of like, who are my students? What's my audience? Is it the audience I want? What are they doing? Are they actually engaging with the course? And if so, which pieces? And then ultimately, really what we care about is, hey, how well are they learning? And so we have a tool called Texan Sites that hopefully many of you have heard of, though I don't know how many have seen. Actually, quick pop quiz. How many people have ever seen Insights? Okay, about half. Good. Yeah, that tries to answer those three questions. So first question, who are my students? We have some basic reports and insights. Right, the first thing is just an enrollment chart over time. Like, hey, how many students do you actually have? When did they sign up? So this gives you at least a high-level glance of how well your kind of course marketing efforts are working, if you have a MOOC that you have marketing for. You can see number of people that have ever enrolled, as well as number of people that are enrolled today. Then we have demographics. So I only showed one, but you have age, education, and gender. So in this case, for example, you can see that, there's, in this particular course, there are people of lots of different ages. We have some 2-year-olds over here. It turns out not everyone is truthful on the internet. Who knew? But I think the overall distribution probably is actually fairly representative of reality. And you see that you have about 30% of students 25 and under, but then actually the majority over 25, which is fairly common for a lot of edX courses. Then we have educational background and gender as well, which I don't have graphs for. And then geography, right? So this course happens to have people from, come on computer, right, so I just zoomed in on the bottom. Most students in this course are from India, US is next, and Australia is actually third. So you might look at this and say, hey, we really want to capitalize on an Australian audience, and we should put more sort of Australian-style jokes in the course, or references or examples. I'm not Australian, so all I can think of is kangaroos, but maybe we can ask John for other suggestions. Snakes and spiders, if you want to live more dangerously. Okay, right, and so this is a quote from one of our partners, really just saying, hey, you need to know this information to understand whether we're reaching the audience that we have in mind, because if not, we want to adjust marketing efforts and sort of find different ways to get the word out. Okay, so next is, now we know kind of who your audience is, what are they doing? And here, we only have, a few initial reports, more will certainly be coming over time. There. We start with a very high-level view that just gives you a sense of like, hey, are people actually in my course at all? And breaks it down into a couple of the most common engagement types, specifically videos and problems. And so week over week, you can see how many students came in and did anything, like open the browser to your course, as well as specifically watched at least one video and tried at least one problem. And noticing trends in this over time, you can decide how to react to what's happening. We also have, and this actually just launched on edX.org last week, and it's been in Open edX for a few months, reports about videos. And so in addition to seeing sort of overall, like, great, 700 people watch videos, now you can drill down to an individual video and see how people interacted with it. So on the x-axis you have duration through the video. The light blue is number of unique students that watched that part of the video, and the dark blue is the number of replays for that segment. So here, for example, you can see that there's a dip, and this is one of our more popular courses, so this goes up to about 40,000. So you can see several thousand people all skip the intro, and if you look at the video, you can see there's actually an on-campus lecture that had some kind of on-campus only stuff that was for the first couple of minutes. So many people skip it, maybe want to cut it out for next time. And then there's this giant spike in replays about 40 minutes in. And again, you sort of look at this and say, what's going on? When you look at the video, you see that the instructor had put a little comic on the screen for about 1 second, which isn't really long enough to actually read the comic. And so you can see that a lot of people sort of pause and go back and look at it again. Whether that's, you think that's okay or not is sort of up to the course team, but now you have a way to see engagement in much more detail. All right. Right, and again, this is another quote. The idea behind the engagement stuff is that if you see where people are and aren't spending their time, you can intervene. Both while the course is running to say, hey, I noticed that no one's using the supplemental videos that we made. You should really check them out because they're going to really help you. Or after the fact, and again, if you're doing this kind of video analysis, you can say, you know what, this video is way too long and people stop watching it. Let's change it, edit it, etc., and make it better for next time. Okay. So finally, how well are they learning, right? And so here, I see Ross in the audience. There's a lot of things that you could imagine doing with sort of learning analytics. We are just starting to scratch the surface. Yeah. And so the first thing we built into Insights, that's sort of a supplement to the grade reports, which already exist. is looking at problems and trying to understand what are the common mistakes that students are making. So it's answer distributions. So here I picked a random example where I don't actually even know exactly what the question was, but I was just clicking through answer distributions in this course, and I thought it was cool because it has robots in it. So the correct answer was number of robots. And so clearly robots are important, and that's right. But a fairly high number of students made a mistake. And the interesting thing about this particular problem, as opposed to many others I was looking at, is that there's a very clear sort of most common mistake, right? A lot of people say time steps, about almost 10% of the students. And then the next most common mistake is far less likely. And so as a course team, you might be able to use this kind of information to say, hey, why is it that people are making this particular mistake? How can I address that better, or give them some hint, or revise the material? All right. So that's Insights. If you've never seen it before, that's kind of most of the functionality that we have today. I certainly didn't see all the screens, and if you want to see more, come talk to me later. I'm happy to give you a live demo. Researchers and institutions. So, of course, they can use Insights as well, but there's tons of other questions that people have that you can't answer from just these high-level dashboards. And so for researchers who want to sort of do data analysis and write papers, as well as institutions that may want to do other kinds of reporting and so on that we haven't built yet, we basically just provide data dumps. And so we take all the data that we have, we split it by organization. So we take sort of all the data for Harvard courses, MIT courses, UQ courses, etc., and deliver them daily/weekly to our partners. And so some of the stuff that you may have seen earlier, like the MOOCs system, we'll take that data and then do other kinds of reporting on it. Okay, so edX, we also have internal analytics things. I'm not going to get into too much, but roughly there's kind of two main efforts. One is a data warehousing effort. It's not this organized, but we try to pull data from sort of all over the place that, as anyone who's been running a system for a while knows, you have like random bits of interesting data in all kinds of different places, and we try to bring it all into one place where we can actually ask questions. And then, if we as an organization are kind of waffling about a decision that we need to make, we can hopefully use some of the data that we have to suggest whether a particular choice is better than another. Okay? Fine, so the thing you're all waiting for, right? Open edX. All of the stuff that we build is open source. And so if you look at analytics on our GitHub account for the edX GitHub account, look for analytics, you'll find a whole bunch of different repositories for all the different pieces of our system. You can use them. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit more later, but I want to just give a shout out to everyone that's helped contribute to these repos. Obviously, it's not an open source community if it's just a bunch of code somewhere. You really need to have people participating. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit more, not getting too technical, but a little bit more technical about kind of what the pieces are, because that might be of interest to anyone that wants to use the stuff that I just showed, as well as potentially contribute either to the rest of the platform that needs instrumentation or to the analytics stuff directly. So I'm going to still start pretty high level, if the computer will let me. Great. Right, so high level, what does this whole analytics system do? We collect raw data, and ruining my bad jokes here. Right, raw data. And then, so that comes from all over the place. Primarily though, what the students do in the system. Then we have the analytics pipeline, which basically processes that into some form that is easy to use and report on. And then we actually deliver, and I want to thank Brian, who's sitting over there for this analogy, cooked data. Because if you start with raw, then clearly you end up with cooked to the end users, right? So in terms of what the pieces are, right, this is the LMS, the course where the students are doing their work. The middle part that does all the processing, we call the analytics pipeline, because it has a bunch of different steps. And then Insights and sort of other downstream uses are on the right, where we actually surface all the graphs I showed and other things like that. And so at a high level, right, there's sort of user behavior on our site. People are doing stuff, they're clicking on things, they're watching videos, there's been any problems, etc. The only way we know that that happens is through events. So whenever a user does something that we think is significant in the system, we track it and sort of basically note like, oh, this thing happened at this time in this course. Like I said, we process it, and then we have a way to query the results of the pipeline and say, hey, how many students from Australia are in this course, right? And then Insights would surface that and display it to you, and hopefully you get knowledge on the other side that you can use to make decisions. So I thought it was important to show at least one example of what these kind of events look like, because again, this sort of touches anyone that's ever tried to submit any student-facing functionality to edX has probably had someone ask like, hey, is this instrumented with analytics stuff? This is what you need. Right? You want to know here, right? Victor played a video on a mobile app at this time in this course. He was, 114 seconds into the video, etc. So this is somewhat simplified, but I just deleted some fields. So these kind of things get saved for any student action, and then we take this and sort of process it in the big pipeline blender and get structured things that say, hey, great, how many video plays were there at second 114? Well, this is going to be counted as one of those. And so the main takeaway here is just, if we don't track things, we can't report and measure them. And so if you're planning to contribute or build student-facing stuff, you should think about what kind of reports or questions you might want to ask about how it's used later, and make sure that there's tracking and instrumentation in the feature, so that when you go to ask questions about it, you at least have the raw data to start to process and ask the questions of. And so you need to plan for this in contributions. It can certainly, depending on the size and complexity of the feature, it can take a while. And so if you think about it early and sort of come up with a proposal, it's more likely to go smoothly than if you sort of submit a PR and say, oh crap, it's not instrumented at all. There's a developer guide section on how to do this in terms of what the code needs to be, as well as some process documentation for kind of how to think about what kind of events you might want. Okay, so diving in just one more level, and I'm not going to go any deeper than this, kind of what are the main pieces here? On the LMS side, there's really just a simple sort of Python library called, I think actually called event tracking, which does the event tracking and makes sure that all the right information like the course ID and username and so on are in the events. In the pipeline, at a high level, we have a collection piece that takes all of these events from all the different servers, as well as other data that we might need, and pulls it in so we can work on it. So that's sort of the raw data. And then we have the pipeline, which is a series of steps that sort of takes that raw data, produces various intermediate forms using batch jobs. So we run it for almost everything nightly. We go through and sort of rerun everything and get up-to-date data as of yesterday, producing some structured intermediate results, as well as define a result database, which is what then you can ask fairly simple questions of like, give me enrollment over time for this course, and it just gives you the answer without having to go back and look at millions and millions of events. And then Insight side, there's an API, so if you want programmatic access to that data, you can do that, or there's Insights, which uses the API to actually surface reports. And so the reason I'm mentioning all this is because if you're running this as part of your OpenEdX install, you need to have all this stuff installed and set up. And so I wanted to quickly mention some of the technologies. Kind of the left and the right side are simple. They're basically just Python apps built into Django LMS and Django apps for Insights and the API. But the pipeline is more complicated because it has to be scalable and sort of deal with the large amounts of data that we have. And so there we use Hadoop and Hive, which allow us to run computations in parallel on many different machines. We use Luigi for kind of task dependency tracking to make sure we only compute the things that we need to compute, and Jenkins for scheduling. And so if you're interested in running the analytics stack, you're going to need some version of those tools set up. And I know that some people who've tried, a bunch of people have succeeded at this point, but it is a fairly large operational investment to get all this up and running. We're trying to make it easier. We would love to have your help. Which is actually, okay. Oh yeah, so then the other thing I wanted to mention was the dev stack. So with a lot of help from folks in the community, specifically Braden most recently from OpenCraft, we now have a dev stack that includes all the regular OpenEdX stuff, as well as all the things I just showed you on the previous slide, the analytics pieces, the pipeline and insights. And so with just a few commands, you can get all of this up and running on your machine, really for development. It's not quite production ready. But you can play with it and test it out, add features, etc. And so, thank you to folks who helped. I think I actually started at the OpenEdX conference last year. Is that right, Gabe? And yeah, so there's a guide in the install and running OpenEdX guide. There's some instructions for how to get that going. Okay. Switching to what are we planning, what's coming from edX Analytics in the next little while. Really one big project, which is per runner analytics. And so our partners are telling us this, as well as a bunch of people I've talked to in the community. If you're running courses that aren't just sort of large MOOCs where you can't look at individuals, but you're doing on campus, you're doing professional education, things like that, you actually want to know about individuals. And so in addition to the grade reports and sort of the basic data downloads that are available, we want to give you some more analytics. And specifically, some of the questions we hope this will help answer is, which students are struggling? Who do I need to reach out to early so that we don't end up at the end of the course and they fail? Has some particular student, let's say Ned, been engaged recently, or has they been slacking off? In a MOOC, you might say, I can't look at everyone who's not being active because there's hundreds of them or thousands of them, but I might want to look at the other extreme, who might be a really good community TA because they're super engaged, and so on. So these are early wireframes, right? Screen mockups. It's not going to look like this, but it's going to look kind of vaguely like this when it ships. And you probably can't see all the details, but the basic idea is that there'll be a place in Insights where you can go to see a list of individual learners, what they've been up to recently, and some metrics of activity. Have they been posting in the forums? Have they been doing problems, etc.? You'll be able to search and filter to get to sort of smaller subsets. And then when you say, you know what, I'm interested in this particular student, computer, sorry, you'll be able to see more details. And so there'll be kind of profile information, as well as the first version will have this sort of activity graph that will show, hey, what has this person been up to over time? And so you can notice, like, oh, Ned's graph looks not like this, but sort of goes to 0. And for the last week and a half, you haven't seen the student. Future iteration, which we don't have designs for yet, is also going to show activity with individual elements of the course. So you can see, hey, have they watched this particular video? Have they done this particular problem? Etc. That's the big Insights feature. So we'll be working on that probably for the next 6 months in a few different iterations. I'm going to dance and sing while the computer is thinking. Well, anyway, I know what it's going to say. Other thing we're working on is trying to make some improvements to DevStack and make it easier to use the platform. And so we are sort of at the point where we can run acceptance tests in the pipeline, but there's still some issues with that. So we want to fix that, fix bugs. It's a little bit hard. Now I jumped ahead. Great. Yeah, some bug fixes. It's a little bit hard still to just get Insights up and running in DevStack. We want to fix that. And yeah, this is a good segue to how you can get involved beyond making sure you instrument your things with events. So first I want to say, we've built a lot of stuff with Insights and the pipeline, and it's now sort of past the prototype stage, I would say. And so we're hoping that more people start to use it and then spend your development cycles on new and interesting things rather than rebuilding stuff we've already built. And so here, there's some documentation. I've pointed to DevStack before. If you get stuck, there's a mailing list specifically for analytics. And another good segue to contributions. These are all hackathon project ideas. If you don't have a hackathon project yet, I think really the priority is to make it easy to install and run the pipeline. Both just improving the documentation, improving some of the automation scripts, and we're talking about maybe working on that ourselves a little bit. And specifically, I know that some folks can't use Amazon Web Services, which we use to provide hosted Hadoop. And so any help on that would be appreciated, and I think would really help everyone be able to use this. Oh yeah, so sorry, it jumps over a slide that I do think is important. If you want to contribute other features, that's certainly also welcome. New reports, improvements to insights, etc. But do contact us early, me I guess early, to coordinate on that because it takes a while and we have a lot of stuff that we're working on. So we want to make sure that if you want to actually merge back into master, that we kind of have the right direction from the start and don't have to pivot too much later. Finally, I wanted to give a shout out to people who were just on the screen, but now won't come up again. Yeah, some of the early adopters of the pipeline. Stanford were the first ones to get this up and running and help contribute some reports. OpenCraft really helped a lot with DevStack, and again, Braden, thank you specifically. And then also we're working on some learner analytics stuff that's going to help move that forward. Ionis was some of the folks that helped kickstart the DevStack work last year. And some folks from edX also helped debug some of the issues with installation. So thanks to all of these folks, and hope to see your name on this list next year if you want to get involved. And that's it. Questions? Ross?
Thanks, Victor. It was a great talk. I'm curious to hear your thoughts now that edX and OpenEdX, people are using it increasingly for hybrid courses in addition to Boost. What are your thoughts about the analytics for those two different categories? How much can you kind of overlap? How much do you need some analytics? I'm just curious to hear your take on that.
Sure. So the question, I think, paraphrasing is, as people start to use edX for both MOOCs and kind of blended learning in smaller settings on campus, how do we make an analytics system that works for both, or do we have to make two different analytic systems? Is that the right question?
That's much better stated.
Yes, so that is something I've been thinking about a lot, and it is hard, right? So we started with most of the stuff I showed for what's in Insights today really is meant for MOOCs, right? So there was no list of individual students because, like, who wants a list of 100,000 students? What are you going to do with it? And so it really focused on aggregates and kind of the content lens of which problems are broken, which videos are effective, etc. Now the learner analytics stuff that we're planning really is aimed at kind of going back to saying, look, a list of 100,000 students probably is still not that useful in a MOOC, unless you can really winnow it down to a smaller group. But that should help with, the sort of blended learning, professional education. I have a cohort of alumni I want to take special care of use cases. And I do think it's going to form the foundation for doing the same thing in MOOCs, right? So once you have that individual level data, now you can do segmentation and say, look, I'm not going to individually contact these people, but I can say, give me the 5,000 people who are in this bucket. They were active last week, they weren't active this week, but I have some reason to believe that they might, be able to get re-engaged. Name that segment somehow, and then contact them. So that's kind of how I'm thinking about it. We went from really high level down to individuals, and then we'll build it back up into sort of segmentation that should help in MOOCs.
How will you help people build better content? Take an example. Making good question is difficult, and if we put questions in the library, we attach a feature. Would it be possible to have an overall statistic of using a quiz, or question and a quiz, and what is the average percentage of students succeeding or failing? Is it a good discriminating question? Is it a good predictive question? How many succeeding students that quiz are succeeding the mug, or vice versa, how many filling in this quiz are filling in the mug, etc. And those statistics help build better content from the teacher perspective. What kind of orientation do you have?
Sure. So let me try to rephrase that. Question is basically, how can we do a better job of giving you useful feedback on, sounds like problems specifically, to know whether or not they're effective? And yeah, I think that's a great question. So there's a ton of work that people have done in running analytics for decades now. So some of that is just a matter of programming, where we have to take some of those reports and just build them in. And that's certainly on the list of things we're interested in doing. Answer distributions was kind of an initial attempt at doing, the first step there. It doesn't give you the connection between what the student did in this one problem and sort of their overall success, but it does give you how many students answered the question at all, and kind of what was the distribution of answers to get a sense of, I thought this was going to be an easy question, but everyone got it wrong and made this particular mistake. Like, what's going on? Some of the stuff that, I'm going to mention OOI again. People are working on is trying to, tag the content in the course with what the learning objective was, and then be able to roll up performance not to just individual problems, but say, hey, your students are really understanding this concept and are totally struggling in this other one. So we're happy to get contributions on that, and regardless of contributions, we will get to it eventually. I think right now, to go back to the previous question, we think that getting some visibility into individuals is the first priority, and then I want to come back to the content lens as well.
With the per student analytics, how are you addressing the privacy implications there?
So the question is, for per student analytics, how are we addressing privacy implications? It's a good question, and we've definitely thought about that somewhat for how much we should and shouldn't surface. I think at a high level, as a student, I kind of expect that my instructor should have access to my grades and whether I got problems right or wrong. So because we're the first version, at least, is going to be instructor facing, that part I think we're sort of covered, basically. We're also going to be showing profile information, and that we're only going to show if it's marked public. And so basically, if the student said, you know what, my profile is public to the world, then we think it's fine to show it to the instructor. And at least for now, as a default, especially in MOOCs, we think it's not reasonable to show instructor data that students have not marked public to the world, even though that might be different on campus. Does that make sense? I guess the final thing I want to say is I'm around all afternoon and in general, so happy to talk more if you have specific feedback on or questions about learner analytics or anything else. Come find me.